I'm quite sure that there are people who take the words of Jesus in today's gospel at face value, who believe that it is wrong to the point of damnation to look at a woman, or a man for that matter, with lust in one's heart, who believe that to marry a divorced woman is to enter into a lifelong series of unclean acts called adultery. I bet there is somewhere in the history of Christian faith someone who plucked out their right eye because it was leading them into sin. And I'm hoping that there's another way to receive this gospel than to take all those things at face value, because what you have at the end of the story then is one-armed, one-eyed, sinful people burning in a lake of fire, every one of us. And that doesn't sound like Jesus. So I wonder if the gospel might yield up something else for us today. One of the precepts by which I encounter Scripture, and this is not something that I invented, is that Scripture, by virtue of its permanence, that is, it never changes, we get the same Bible reading in the same place year after year, century after century, with changes in the idiom, but not usually in the meaning. That because of that stability, Scripture has a capacity to generate surplus meaning, so that it can mean one thing in one place and another thing in another place. And I think it's important for us to be having conversations among ourselves that start off with, I wonder if Scripture could mean this, rather than conversations that say, if you don't believe this is what Scripture means, you're going to hell, or you're wrong, or you're bad. So I start with that presupposition that we encounter Scripture from a variety of perspectives in different times and places, and that it speaks to us in different ways. The parable of the prodigal will be experienced quite differently by someone who has returned home to a welcome than by the one who never left home and is full of resentment. Mark MacDonald, the National Indigenous Anglican Bishop, talked about an occasion in which one of the professors at the seminary he was teaching in came to him and said, your students, that meant the indigenous students at the seminary, they believe that the world was created in 6 days in 4004 BC because somebody had done the mathematics, and that's what Scripture says is true. And Mark said, I think they do believe that. Did you ask them if they also believe in evolution? Because if you do, they'll say that they believe in that too. And then he talks about how a mountain looks quite different. In fact, is a different mountain, depending on the perspective from which you encounter the mountain. 4 directions thinking. And if you've ever tried to find your way through the mountains and wondered where you are, you can be sure that the mountain doesn't always look the same. It's not always the same mountain, and it doesn't always tell you the same truth about where you are. So in that spirit, I want to dig into these readings and say, I wonder if there might be something else going on. And I want to use 2 images. One is the image of our body. The other is the image of 2 recent experiences I've had with public drama. When I was 16 years old, my friend Mark Cherniak ran for the bus. He was 17 years old, and before he reached the school bus, he fell down on the ground dead of a heart attack. He had a flaw in his heart that no one could see or know about, and something was wrong with him that could not be known or judged, that ended his life. 43 years later, I underwent heart bypass surgery because I was at risk of dying of a heart attack. But what was wrong with me could be known, and so a physician and a surgeon could get together and find it and do something about it. Our bodies are beautiful. When you think about how they work, the way they turn air into energy, the way they turn food into movement, the way they heal themselves, the immune system, the way we can feel things on the end of our fingers that are so beautiful, the touch of a baby's head, the touch of a lover's hand, the way a smell can bring back something from our childhood 40 or 50 or 80 years ago. Our bodies are beautiful. But every last one of them has something wrong with it in this very moment. Every last one of us is going to need a physician to come to us and care for our bodies because of something that's broken in them. They are beautiful, but they're messy. And I wonder if today's scripture might be saying something like, folks, let's not be comparing bodies today. Let's not be in a competition to see who has the most perfect body, because the predicament in which we find ourselves is that each of our bodies has flaws and brokenness in it that will cause us to need one another, expert care, love, and compassion. Mark Cherniak, 17 years old. Michael Thompson, 59 years old. We found out about the flaw in tragically different ways at different times in our journeys. The other image that I want to offer up to you is really quite fresh. Last Saturday, as part of a birthday present, because our daughter is very smart and says, Mom likes event gifts. So the event gift was the play The Colony of Unrequited Dreams at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. It was highly professional, wonderfully staged. There was not a flaw in the staging, in the way that the props were moved around the stage, in the way that the lights worked, in the way that the actors acted. It was gorgeous. Last night, we went to the Scarborough Musical Theatre because a friend of mine is producing a play there. And the play was Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. And everybody was an amateur, and none of them was perfect. And sometimes, because we were sitting sort of near the orchestra drowned out what people were saying, and we couldn't hear it all that well. I won't tell Shannon any of these things. I will tell her it was a beautiful performance. And the reason I will tell her it was a beautiful performance is this. Before the play began, there was a couple of young girls, 14 years old maybe a bit younger, selling refreshments. They were running the refreshment booth and having the time of their lives. And then, as the play was coming to an end, I noticed that one of them was sitting in the front row. And the theater is kind of a thrust stage, so people are on three sides of it, can see the play and can see each other. And I have never seen anybody as in love with a play as this young girl was. So as much as our bodies may tell us that there's something wrong with us, and we need to be gentle and generous and not compare ourselves or judge ourselves because of the imperfections in our lives that show up in ways that sometimes are quite disturbing, we are also beautiful. And all we need is for one person to notice how beautiful we are for everything to change. I think that when I saw that little girl so in love, so excited to be part of this thing that was happening that she was enjoying with such delight, I think I saw the face of God. And God's delight in the ways in which, in our pokey amateur way, in our sitting too close to the orchestra and overwhelming the person on the stage way, and the way that things don't work exactly as we planned, but we still end up with something fine and something together, I believe that God smiles and says for a moment, that's what I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for them to be like that. And I believe that part of our responsibility as Christians is not simply to talk about the sin of the world, the way in which our bodies and our souls and our communities are broken by our foolish choices and bad luck, but also to talk about the beauty of our lives. Matthew Fox says, we've had a lot of original sin. Could we talk some about the original blessing of our humanity? Not because one of these things is true and the other isn't, but because these two truths spill out of Scripture because of its abundance and surplus of meaning. It speaks to us about what is broken and what is beautiful, and invites us to honor both, and to trust that God saves us whole. Not just the pretty bits, not just the parts that work, but all of us. That there's no bright line beyond which someone can say, I'm in and you're not. Because I think that's what's going on in Corinth, and I think that's what's going on in the gospel. People are trying to get on one side or the other of that bright line and point out, so that I think they can feel a bit justified, who's on the wrong side of the line. I've played that game at times in my life, and I've won and I've lost. I think many of us have been caught up in that at some point or another in our lives, and some of us win more than we lose, and some of us lose more than we win. But I believe that when we honor both our brokenness and our beauty, and when we care for one another with a kind of gentleness that recognizes in one another's face all that is rich and beautiful and all that is hurt and struggling, then we honor the creatures that God has fashioned and the purpose to which God calls those creatures.